I think in white America, when conservatives and liberals and when religious leaders talk about family values and the celebration of them, that the black community is exemplary historically in its effort to survive, a successful effort. I think young black men and young black women, if they understand these stories, if they understand these truths, then they would be more responsible in their behavior in terms of how they treat themselves, how they treat each other, how black men treat black women. I think this is an important truth that we need to sustain us as we move toward the future.
I would explain the Margaret Garner story to children, and actually this question has come up. My students at NKU, some of them are, want to be school teachers. We'll be dealing with K through 12, actually, and we're thinking about ways that we can bring this story to the young people, both black and white, because again, this is a story where we need to raise the consciousness about all of our contributions and all of our history within the local region. How do we do that? Well, what my students say, some of them, and NKU has a predominantly white student body. Some of my students are, however, dealing with classrooms in the inner city in Cincinnati, which are mostly black. What my white students are finding is that oftentimes the black children have very poor self-esteem, have very little vision for what they can do as adults, do not envision themselves going to college, bettering their lives, and becoming contributors. And what I'm thinking is that one way to deal with this is to talk about our heroes, to talk about our heroes of today, our heroes of yesterday, to provide images and role models to young people so that they can see there are other ways to envision their lives. This is something that the Freedom Center is doing also with its everyday heroes and its dialogues about race. This is a way that we can begin to bring young children into the story. And I think that we can actually talk about the Margaret Garner story as well. But I think we need to prepare them. I think we need to talk a little bit about this whole history of slavery, what it meant, what kind of a system it was, and why someone under that system would choose such a drastic means of dealing with it. But I think that we can gradually get into that story in various ways by looking at some of the history, looking at some of the local efforts to resist and run away, and to envision oneself not as a slave, to envision oneself as a free person, thinking person who was human. And this contradicts the image that the slaveholders and pro-slavery forces in the society had of African Americans. The folks who ran away believed that their minds could not be enslaved. And this is an important, I think, a very important message to get across to adults, young people, and people of various descriptions, various racial and ethnic backgrounds. And it's not only a historical concept of oneself, it certainly has contemporary implications as well. If your mind is not enslaved, if you do not believe what other people are telling you about inferiority, that you believe that you have a mission and a purpose and a talent and a gift to bring to the world, and that these gifts can be used to interact with other people, to interact with people who are like yourself, who are different from yourself, then your life is full, and you will have more than a little bit to do, work to do in the world. Just recently, the 5th through 8th graders at St. Joseph's Academy in Walton, which is also in Boone County, Kentucky. This is an all-white school. The children were the winners of a contest, a Freedom Quest contest that was sponsored by the Freedom Center as a web quest, so it was something on the computer. These children won the contest with their contribution about freedom. They decided to use their $500 prize money to purchase a plaque dedicated to the memory of runaways on the Underground Railroad who escaped over the Ohio River into Indiana from Rabbit Hash, Kentucky. They bought the plaque, designed the plaque, created the wording on the plaque, and we had a marvelous celebration, which was a celebration not only of the heroes on the Underground Railroad who made it across or attempted to make it across the Ohio River into freedom, but it was a celebration. To me, it was certainly a celebration of those young people as well. They decided that this message should be there in their community for themselves and for future children. And to me, it's just an example of what can be done. And these were very young children who got involved in this. So I don't see any reason not to talk about the story, not to talk about what people are running away from, and to talk about how we as activists in our own lives can develop a plan of action, learn and grow, and then become who we want to be. I also think that we'll be asking this question about the whole business of women's resistance to sexual violence. Now, again, this is an issue that crosses racial lines, actually crosses gender lines as well, because to be victimized sexually is something that we have to look at both in heterosexual and homosexual relationships, actually. So this is intimate partner violence, something that we would like, I would like audiences to grapple with and to look at this whole issue of victimization, but also the ability of the victim to have a chance to resist, to have an activist role, to be able to have agency under these conditions. And these are questions that Margaret and women who were enslaved had to grapple with as well. Some of these women were able to run away and avoid further victimization. Some of them succumbed to the violence that was perpetrated against them. Some of them negotiated their position and actually subjugated themselves to the victimization in order to negotiate a better life for themselves and their children. So this whole issue of how we deal with sexual victimization is one that is important from this story as well. What we would like to gain from this story as well is the opportunity to open up a dialogue about race relations. If our families are intermingled, have both black and white family members, especially in this region of the borderlands in Kentucky and Ohio, how do we get beyond the the resistance to talking about our history, this local history, so that it no longer is so uncomfortable and a threat, no longer just an opportunity to avoid the history, to change the history so that it becomes unreal in some ways, and also is it an opportunity for us to tell young people that the history and the contributions of African Americans in the region is so important that African Americans are not newcomers to Boone County, to northern Kentucky. Yes, many of them had to escape to find a welcoming community, free, black, or otherwise, but oftentimes African Americans did stay around. How did they do that? What was their ability to survive in a hostile environment? And why is it today that young people, newcomers to the area, are assuming that African Americans were not part of that local history?
Recorded history is usually a product of what people who control our society wish to be published. But in most societies, and particularly in our society, with it being such a litigious, in other words, a court-driven process, there are records that go back more than 200 years that document the black presence, the Native American presence, the Hispanic presence, and the white presence in America. And the story is pretty much the same. The story is a story of people looking to establish communities where they, in turn, could live out their lives with a sense of dignity. Black people and other minorities in America, particularly brown people, Native Americans, and Mexicans who lived in Texas, Colorado, Arizona, California, have not gone to the trouble to go into those records to validate their own self-worth. And usually that's happened because of a sense of inferiority, when in fact you will find in those records examples like the life of Robert and Margaret Garner that talk about a very heroic distance, a very heroic existence, a very heroic set of behavior on the part of ordinary people in each one of our families. If our last name is Rodriguez or if our last name is Brown, there are these wonderful stories of the effort on the part of ordinary people to live very dignified lives. I would think understanding the story of Margaret Garner should obligate each person to do family research so that they can find the story that helps them understand their human self-worth, and in turn pass that on to your children, to your grandchildren, and they too have the responsibility of carrying that story forward. In the process, I think that allows us to get rid of our shame, our anger, and allows us to deal with people of other races on a level of calmness and dignity.